Hello, crafters. This is Yana Smakula for simonsstm.com. Welcome back for another Yeepy for Yana video. In this episode, I'll show you a slightly different way to color your floral images with alcohol markers without the stress of blending. I call this abstract coloring technique. It has a modern graphic colored look to it, and the best part about it is that you don't need alcohol markers that blend well together. In fact, the greater the difference in color or shade of your marker, the better it is for this technique. And I know we all have these odd marker colors in our collections that we can't really get to blend or work with other markers in our stash, so this technique is perfect for utilizing those markers. In my previous Yeepy for Yana video, I showed you how to stamp a background pattern using masking technique and Simon's Look for the Rainbows stamp set. I'm using the exact same stamp set for today's video, and I'm also doing background pattern stamping using masking. Now, because I shared the stamping and masking process in the previous video, I'm not going to repeat the same thing in this episode. If you missed that previous episode, I encourage you to go back and watch it. Now, let's talk about the abstract blending-free coloring technique. Here are a flower and a leaf I stamped and test colored using this technique and a regular traditional coloring method to show you these two side by side. This flower petal was colored using the traditional method where you blend the colors together. You have a light, a medium, and a dark color. The other petals, this one is a good example, were colored without any blending, and you can observe harsh lines between the colors. This gives a very different abstract, modern look, graphic look. The same with the image of the leaf. This leaf was colored in the usual way with the use of blending. The other leaves were colored differently without any blending, and again, you can see harsh lines between the different marker colors. We're going to use this no blending technique to color the stamped pattern that we created. I like to begin with my lightest color, and for this image, this is RV10, and color the entire image. You can use this coloring method with many different images. I find that I like to use florals the most for this. I like to begin my graphic coloring by applying the lightest color to the entire image. When you color with Copics, you typically saturate your paper with the lightest color, or go back to the lightest color to blend all of the colors together. While the paper is wet, it makes it easier to blend the colors, hence why you would often start with the lightest color and apply it to the area you're coloring to saturate it. When you color with alcohol markers in the usual way, you also do not color the entire image, you work in little sections. You color one petal at a time, as this allows the ink to remain wet long enough on that area and help you do your blending. Here, we don't want any blending to take place. In fact, it is rather best if the blending does not happen. So color the entire image using your base color and even set it aside for a few seconds or minutes to dry. I'm going to apply my base leaf color next, and for this I'm using the YG00 marker. Again, I'm going to let this color sit and dry on the paper before I add my medium and my dark green to the leaves. The base flower layer is now dry, and I can begin adding my medium color. I'm using R83. I wouldn't normally combine these two colors when coloring something with my Copics. The RV10 and R83 would be a bit hard to blend, but here, these colors work well together because there is a noticeable difference between the two. You want to avoid using colors that are too close together, as they won't provide enough contrast on your finished piece. Now, the darker you go, the less of an area you color. Remember not to blend anything, just apply a solid layer of color. And it is up to you how many marker colors to use to color your image this way. I would say use 3 markers, a light, a medium, and a dark. If you have a big marker collection, you can add a 4th or even a 5th color to add greater color variation to the flowers or whatever image it is you're coloring. While the medium flower layer is drying, I'm going to color the medium leaf layer. For this, I'm using YG03. Ideally, it would be best to pick a slightly different color here, as you can see, there isn't that much color variation between the light and medium markers. You can tell them apart, but they do blend in a lot, I think. Next comes the dark floral layer. I'm using RV19 color. And again, this isn't something you would easily blend with the R83, which was used for the medium layer. So this creates a nice contrast between the colors. With each consecutive color or layer, I cover a smaller and smaller area. And by the time I'll get to the fourth layer, I will cover just the smallest parts of my petals. Here is what this looks like at this point, and I'm already loving it. Now, the dark color I'm using for the leaves is YG17. And again, notice how I'm just laying down the color, not blending anything, and coloring smaller sections of the leaves. Finally, I'm adding the darkest pink or red to the flower petals, and here I'm using R39. This is adding the darkest shadows to my petals. Overall, we used RV10, R83, RV19, and R39, not the typical marker mix you'd use to blend a petal. Those colors would be very hard to blend together. Not impossible, but just hard. Yet here, they give very beautiful contrast, high contrast results. Now, you can try this technique not just with Copic markers. I know a lot of you have other alcohol markers in your stash, and I encourage you to use this coloring medium with any alcohol markers you have. Some markers out there have a bullet nib, and I think using a bullet nib marker would work even better for this coloring method. I have some Alt New and Tonic Studios Nuvo alcohol markers in my stash, and they both have a bullet nib. I'm going to try using those markers next for this coloring method. I also brought in another green marker. This is G94 as my darkest, and added deeper, darker shadows here and there to my leaves. For my flower centers, I used Y00 as the lightest, Y06 as medium color, and Y15 as the darkest color. Here is a look at the colored background. It looks fantastic as is. And I know many of you like your florals on light, white backgrounds. While I do like this look, I also love to see florals on dark, bold backgrounds. And so I tried using a dark blue marker on my test panel to see if that would look good. I did like how it looked, and so I used a B39 marker to color the entire background dark blue. This step is really optional, and it depends on your personal preference. I love dark backgrounds, so I often go for dark backgrounds on my cards. You might prefer light, and I encourage you to keep your background light if that's what you like. From here, you can use your background to make a card. With a gorgeous background like this, all you need to add is a skinny strip sentiment. A skinny strip because you don't want to cover much of the background with a bold, big sentiment. You can stamp a skinny sentiment, you can foil it, or you can use one of Simon's pre-printed skinny strip sentiments to finish a card like this. Here is what my colored background looks like. I love the way it turned out. The dark blue helps the vibrant pink flowers pop. To create a sentiment for this card, I foiled one that reads Birthday Wishes. This comes from the Spellbinders Everyday Sentiments 2 Glimmer Hot Foil Plate and Die set. At first, I foiled a sentiment on a dark blue cardstock, but later changed my mind and refoiled it on white. I trimmed the colored background panel to 4 1/4 by 5 1/4 and adhered that to A2 white side folding card base so that a little bit of white card base showed at the bottom of the card. You could also do a diagonal cut, and looking back at this card, I think I should have done that and it would have looked a little bit better. I adhered 4 scrap cardstock panels together to add dimension to my card and used that to adhere the background panel to the card base. You can use fun foam for that. I personally have loads of scrap cardstock that I'm trying to use up, and I don't have any fun foam in my stash at the moment, so that's why I'm using cardstock. I embellished the card with Simon's Stay Gold sequins. I adhered them over areas where I had marker bleeding to cover the bleeding up. And then I also scattered some over the background. And lastly, I foam mounted my birthday wishes sentiment, and that finished my card. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you next time.